During a live stream, my socialite daughter-in-law poured hot soup on me just to amuse her followers. Her family laughed and said, "Relax, it's just a joke." 2 minutes later, my millionaire son broke the door, straightened his suit, and said 3 words that made her beg for forgiveness. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Teresa, and I'm 67 years old. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but sometimes the truth demands to be heard, no matter how painful it might be. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in March, the kind of day where spring was just beginning to show itself through the kitchen window of what used to be my home. I was reading a book in my favorite armchair when my daughter-in-law, Aria, burst through the front door, her phone already in her hand, that familiar gleam in her eyes that I'd learned to recognize over the past 3 years. "Teresa," she called out in that artificially sweet voice she used when she wanted something. "Perfect timing. I'm about to start my live stream and I have the most amazing idea." I set my book down slowly. At 67, I'd learned to be cautious around Aria's amazing ideas. They usually involved me doing something that made her look good to her thousands of followers, while I felt increasingly uncomfortable in my own home. "What kind of idea?" I asked, though I already knew I probably wouldn't like the answer. Aria was 28, with perfectly styled blonde hair and makeup that looked like it took hours to apply. She'd married my son Tyler 2 years ago, and from the moment she moved into our family home, things had changed. The house that had been my sanctuary for 40 years suddenly felt like a stage where I was expected to perform. "I'm doing a special family cooking segment today," she announced, already setting up her phone on the kitchen counter. My followers absolutely love authentic family moments, and having Tyler's mom help will be so heartwarming. My stomach tightened. Tyler was supposed to be in Chicago on business for the week, leaving me alone with Aria and her increasingly demanding schedule of content creation. Every day seemed to bring a new scheme to feature me in her videos, always under the guise of family bonding. "I'm not really comfortable being filmed," I said gently, the same response I'd given countless times before. Aria's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Oh, come on, Teresa. It's just a little cooking segment. Besides, Tyler specifically asked me to include you more in family activities." That stopped me cold. Tyler had said that? My son, who knew how much I valued my privacy, who'd always been protective of me, especially after his father died 5 years ago. "He said that?" I asked, unable to hide the uncertainty in my voice. "Of course he did," Aria replied, already adjusting her phone's position. "He worries about you being lonely, especially while he's traveling so much for work. This way, you'll feel more involved, and my followers get to see what a loving family we are." The guilt hit me like a wave. Maybe Tyler was right. Maybe I had been too withdrawn lately. And if this would make him happy, if it would help me connect better with his wife, what would I need to do? I heard myself asking. Aria's smile broadened, and she clapped her hands together. "Just help me make your famous vegetable soup, the one Tyler's always talking about. We'll show everyone how the recipe gets passed down through generations. It'll be beautiful, my vegetable soup." It was true that Tyler loved it, had been asking me to make it since he was a little boy. The recipe had been my mother's, and her mother's before that. Maybe sharing it wouldn't be so bad. "All right," I said slowly, "but nothing embarrassing, okay?" "Of course not," Aria laughed, but there was something about the sound that made my skin crawl. "Trust me, Teresa, this will be perfect." Within minutes, she had her lighting set up and her phone positioned to capture the entire kitchen area. I watched as she transformed into her online persona, all bright smiles and animated gestures. "Hello, beautiful souls," she chirped at the camera. "Welcome back to my channel. Today is super special because I have Tyler's amazing mom, Teresa, here with me, and she's going to teach us how to make her legendary family soup recipe." I stood awkwardly beside her, unsure where to look or how to position myself. The comments on her phone screen were flying by too fast to read, but I could see hearts and fire emojis popping up constantly. "Now, Teresa has been making this soup for decades," Aria continued. putting her arm around me in a way that felt more possessive than affectionate. She's such an inspiration, still cooking at 67. Isn't that amazing, everyone? The way she said my age made it sound ancient, like I was some kind of relic being displayed for entertainment. But I smiled and nodded, trying to play along for Tyler's sake. For the next 20 minutes, I walked through the recipe, chopping vegetables and explaining the techniques my mother had taught me. Arya kept up a constant stream of commentary, occasionally asking me questions that felt designed to highlight my age or make me seem confused. "Oh, Teresa, you're adding so much salt," she laughed at one point. "I guess when you get older, your taste buds change, right, everyone?" I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, but I forced a smile. "Just following the recipe that's worked for 50 years, I said quietly. The soup was nearly ready when Arya suggested I serve it. "Teresa, why don't you ladle some into bowls for us to taste? This is the moment everyone's been waiting for." I picked up the ladle with hands that were slightly trembling. Whether from nerves or anger, I wasn't sure anymore. The soup was hot, steam rising from the pot, and I carefully began filling the first bowl. "Be careful, Teresa," Arya said loudly, moving closer to me. "We don't want any accidents." That's when I should have seen it coming. The way she positioned herself, the way her phone was angled, the gleeful anticipation in her voice. But I was focused on not spilling, on doing this right for the cameras, for Tyler, for the family harmony I thought I was helping to create. As I lifted the ladle to pour into the second bowl, Arya suddenly lurched forward, bumping into my arm with enough force to send the entire contents of the ladle flying. But instead of spilling harmlessly onto the counter, the scalding soup splashed directly across my chest and arms. The pain was immediate and excruciating. I cried out, dropping the ladle as the hot liquid soaked through my shirt, burning my skin. I stumbled backward, my hands instinctively trying to pull the wet fabric away from my body. "Oh my God!" Arya squealed, but she was laughing, actually laughing. "Did everyone see that? Teresa had a little accident. Don't worry, she's fine." I wasn't fine. My chest felt like it was on fire, and I could already feel blisters forming on my forearms. But what hurt even more was the sound of laughter coming from behind the camera. Arya's mother, who had apparently been watching from the living room, was giggling like she'd just witnessed the funniest thing in the world. "It's just a little soup, Teresa," she called out. "Don't be so dramatic." Arya was still addressing her camera, her voice bright and entertained. "Sometimes cooking with the older generation comes with surprises. Teresa's okay, everyone, just a little kitchen mishap. Happens to the best of us." I stood there, scalded and humiliated, while she treated my pain like entertainment for her followers. The comments on her screen were a blur of crying, laughing emojis and messages saying things like, "OMG, so funny," and "Poor grandma. I need to clean this up," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Of course, Arya said dismissively, still focused on her phone. "Thanks for being such a good sport, Teresa. Everyone say bye to Tyler's mom." I didn't wait to hear the goodbyes. I stumbled to the bathroom, my skin screaming in pain, my heart breaking from something much worse than physical injury. As I ran cold water over my burns, I could hear Arya still talking to her camera, milking the accident for every bit of content she could squeeze from it. That's when I realized the terrible truth. This hadn't been an accident at all. The way she'd positioned herself, the way she'd bumped into me at exactly the right moment, the way she'd immediately turned it into entertainment rather than showing any concern for my injuries, I had been set up, used, humiliated for the amusement of strangers on the internet. And my son, the one person I thought would always protect me, was hundreds of miles away, completely unaware that his wife had just turned his mother into a laughingstock. As I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, my shirt soaked and my skin red and blistering, I wondered how I had ended up here. How had I become so powerless in my own home? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? The sound of Arya's laughter drifted down the hallway, and I realized that my real nightmare was just beginning. The burns on my chest and arms took 3 days to stop throbbing, but the humiliation felt like it might last forever. I spent those days mostly in my bedroom, applying aloe vera gel and trying to make sense of what had happened. Arya knocked on my door twice, both times with that same artificially sweet voice, asking if I needed anything. "I'm fine," I called back each time, though we both knew that was a lie. On the fourth day, I finally felt strong enough to venture back into the kitchen. The house was quiet. Arya had gone out to meet with some sponsors. She'd announced loudly enough for me to hear through my bedroom door. I was grateful for the solitude as I made myself a cup of tea, my movements careful and deliberate. That's when I noticed her laptop sitting open on the kitchen counter, the screen still glowing. I shouldn't have looked. I knew that. But something compelled me forward, maybe the same instinct that had been whispering warnings about Arya for months. The laptop was angled so I could see the screen clearly, and what I saw made my blood run cold. She was in the middle of editing the video from Tuesday. But this wasn't just a simple recording of our cooking session. She had multiple camera angles, as if she'd set up several phones around the kitchen without telling me. And she was editing it, cutting and splicing the footage to make it look even more dramatic than it had been. She'd zoomed in on my face during the moment of impact, capturing every detail of my shock and pain. She'd added slow-motion effects to the soup flying through the air. Worst of all, she'd edited out her own movement forward, the bump that had caused the accident, making it look like I had simply been clumsy. My hands shook as I scrolled through the comments that were already pouring in. Thousands of them. "LOL, old people shouldn't be allowed in kitchens." "Poor Arya having to deal with this mess." "Grandma needs to be in a home." "This is why elderly people are dangerous." The cruelty was breathtaking. These strangers were laughing at my pain, making jokes about my age, suggesting I was incompetent and dangerous. And Arya was encouraging it all, responding to comments with crying laughing emojis and messages like, "She's okay, just a little kitchen drama." But that wasn't the worst part. As I kept scrolling, I found something that made my stomach drop to the floor. A comment from someone with a familiar profile picture. "This is gold. Remember last month with the old guy at the coffee shop? You should do a whole series." The old guy at the coffee shop? What was that referring to? My fingers trembling, I clicked on Arya's profile and started scrolling through her previous videos. What I found made me feel sick to my core. There it was, posted 6 weeks ago. "Coffee shop chaos with local senior." The thumbnail showed an elderly man who looked to be in his 70s, coffee spilled all over his shirt, looking confused and embarrassed. In the video, Arya was accidentally bumping into him as he tried to carry his coffee to a table. I kept scrolling. Grocery store slip-up showed an elderly woman falling in an aisle with Arya rushing to help while clearly filming the whole thing. Bus stop blunder featured an older man dropping his papers while trying to board a bus, with Arya's commentary making light of his struggle. Video after video, all featuring elderly people in humiliating situations, all with Arya positioned perfectly to capture their embarrassment. And the comments on each one were the same. Cruel laughter, age-related insults, suggestions that these people were incompetent or burdens on society. My daughter-in-law wasn't just a content creator. She was a predator, targeting vulnerable elderly people for entertainment. And I had been her latest victim, but I was different from the others. I lived in her house. I was family, which meant a new, horrifying thought crept into my mind. I rushed to Tyler's study and pulled out the stack of papers he kept in his desk drawer. Insurance documents, medical records, financial statements. Things I'd never paid much attention to before, trusting Tyler to handle our family's business affairs. I found what I was looking for buried in a folder marked Future Planning. It was a consultation form from Sunset Manor, a local assisted living facility. The date was from 2 months ago, and it was filled out in Arya's handwriting. Potential resident, Teresa Blackwood, age 67, concerns, increasing confusion, safety issues in kitchen, possible early-stage dementia, family contact, Arya Blackwood, daughter-in-law and primary caregiver. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Increasing confusion, safety issues, early-stage dementia. None of it was true, but here it was, documented in writing, creating a paper trail of my supposed incompetence. I kept digging through the folder and found more papers. A consultation with an elder law attorney about protecting family assets when a senior family member becomes incapacitated. A brochure for memory care facilities. A printout of an article titled, "When to Make the Difficult Decision. Signs Your Elderly Parent Needs Professional Care." The pattern was becoming sickeningly clear. Aria hadn't just been humiliating me for online content. She'd been building a case, documenting incidents, creating evidence that I was unfit to live independently. But why? What did she gain from having me declared incompetent? The answer hit me like a physical blow. Tyler's trust fund, the one his father had set up before he died, the one that would pass to Tyler completely when I either died or was declared mentally incompetent. The trust fund worth nearly $2 million that Tyler had never even mentioned to Aria, as far as I knew. But somehow she knew about it. My phone buzzed with a text message. Tyler. "Hey, Mom. How are you feeling? Aria told me about the kitchen accident. She said you seemed pretty shaken up. We should talk when I get back tomorrow." Aria had already gotten to him, already started spinning her version of events. And knowing Tyler, knowing how much he loved and worried about me, he would be concerned, worried about my safety, open to suggestions about how to better protect me. I sank into Tyler's desk chair, my mind racing. How long had this been going on? How many other incidents had Aria orchestrated or exaggerated? The time I'd fallen down the stairs last month, had that really been an accident? The day I'd gotten lost driving to the grocery store, had someone tampered with my GPS? Every strange occurrence, every moment of confusion or mishap over the past few months suddenly looked different through this new lens. I hadn't been getting older and more fragile. I'd been under attack. The front door slammed, and I heard Aria's voice calling out cheerfully, "Teresa, I'm home. How are you feeling, sweetie?" I quickly shoved the papers back into the folder and closed the desk drawer. My heart was pounding as I tried to compose myself, but inside a cold fury was building. She thought she was so clever. She thought I was just another helpless elderly person she could manipulate and exploit. She thought she could steal my son's inheritance and destroy my life for social media content. She was wrong. As I heard her footsteps coming down the hallway toward the study, I straightened my shoulders and prepared to do something I hadn't done in years. Fight back. "There you are." Aria appeared in the doorway, her phone already in her hand. "I was thinking we could do a little follow-up video about your recovery. Show everyone how resilient you are." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since the kitchen incident. The calculated gleam in her eyes, the way she held her phone like a weapon, the false concern dripping from every word. "Actually, Aria," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I think we need to have a conversation about a lot of things." For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Something that looked almost like fear. Good. It was about time she learned that this elderly woman still had some fight left in her. And tomorrow, when Tyler came home, she was going to discover just how much trouble she'd gotten herself into. The conversation I'd planned with Aria never happened. She must have sensed the shift in my demeanor because she suddenly remembered an urgent appointment and disappeared for the rest of the evening. I spent the night in Tyler's study, going through every document I could find, piecing together the full scope of what had been happening under my own roof. By morning, I had a stack of evidence that painted a terrifying picture. Bank statements showing unusual charges to my credit card for things I'd never purchased. Medical appointment confirmations for consultations I'd never scheduled. Even a partially filled application for guardianship papers, with Aria listed as the proposed guardian. I was sitting at the kitchen table, organizing everything into neat piles, when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. My heart jumped. Tyler wasn't supposed to be back until evening, and Aria had left an hour ago for what she called a content creation meeting. The front door didn't open. Instead, I heard footsteps around the side of the house, then the sound of someone trying to open the back door. My blood ran cold. We always kept that door locked, and only family knew where we hid the spare key. Then I heard something that made my stomach drop. The sound of wood splintering. Someone was breaking down the back door. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, when I heard a voice that made me freeze. "Mom? Mom, where are you?" Tyler. But something was wrong with his voice. He sounded frantic, desperate, almost wild, and he'd just broken down his own back door. I rushed toward the sound, my papers scattering as I stood up too quickly. When I reached the back hallway, I found Tyler standing in the doorway, pieces of the doorframe scattered around his feet. His usually immaculate business suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his face that scared me. I'd never seen my son look like that before. His eyes were bright with fury. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. He looked like a man who was barely holding himself together. "Tyler?" I whispered. "What's wrong? Why did you break the door?" He spun toward me, and for a moment his expression softened with relief. "Mom, thank God you're okay." He crossed the distance between us in 2 long strides and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "Of course I'm okay," I said, though my voice was muffled against his chest. "But Tyler, you're scaring me. What's going on?" He pulled back, his hands on my shoulders, scanning my face and then looking down at my arms where the burns were still visible beneath my sleeves. His expression darkened again. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Aria? She's at a meeting. Tyler, you need to tell me what's—" "It wasn't a meeting," he interrupted. "She's at her mother's house, probably trying to figure out damage control." My confusion must have shown on my face because Tyler ran a hand through his hair and took a deep breath, clearly trying to calm himself down. "Mom, I need you to sit down. There's a lot I have to tell you, and none of it is going to be easy to hear." He led me back to the kitchen where he saw the papers I'd been organizing. His face went pale as he recognized some of the documents. "You found them," he said quietly. "You knew?" The words came out as barely a whisper. Tyler sank into the chair across from me, suddenly looking exhausted. "I've been investigating Aria for the past 6 weeks, ever since I got an anonymous tip about her content." "Anonymous tip?" "Someone sent me a link to one of her videos, the one with the elderly man at the coffee shop. They said they thought I should know what my wife was doing." He paused, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, some kind of misunderstanding. But then I started watching more of her content, and I realized—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "You realized what?" "That my wife is a monster." The word hung in the air between us. Monster. It seemed too harsh, too dramatic, but as I thought about everything I'd discovered, I realized it might be the most accurate description. "I hired a private investigator," Tyler continued. "I needed to know how deep this went. Whether you were safe, whether she was planning something worse." "The trust fund," I said quietly. Tyler's head snapped up. "You know about that? I found papers about having me declared incompetent, about you inheriting when I couldn't finish the sentence. $2 million, Tyler said, his voice bitter. "That's what this is all about. $2 million that I never even wanted, never even thought about. Money that she somehow found out about and decided was worth destroying our family to get. I felt like I was in a nightmare. How did she find out? She went through my personal files while I was on a business trip last month. The investigator found deleted browser history on my computer, searches for information about trust fund inheritance laws, elder abuse statutes, guardianship procedures." The pieces were falling into place, each revelation more sickening than the last. "Tyler, the kitchen incident. I saw it." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I saw the whole thing." "What do you mean you saw it?" Tyler pulled out his phone and showed me an app I didn't recognize. "I installed security cameras in the house 3 weeks ago. Hidden ones. I needed to know what was happening when I wasn't here." He tapped the screen, and suddenly I was watching myself from Tuesday afternoon, standing in our kitchen while Aria set up her phone. The angle was different from her recording, positioned higher up, and it showed something her cameras had missed. It showed her deliberately positioning herself to bump into me. It showed her calculating the angle, timing her movement perfectly. It showed her smile just before she lurched forward. "She planned it," I breathed. "Every second of it." Tyler's voice was getting harder again. and I watched it happen in real time from my hotel room in Chicago. I watched my wife burn my mother on purpose for internet points. I felt sick. Why didn't you come home immediately? Because I needed proof. Real proof that would hold up in court. He gestured to a briefcase I hadn't noticed him carrying. I spent the last 4 days gathering evidence. Bank records, video footage, witness statements from some of her other victims. Other victims? The investigator tracked down 12 people she's targeted over the past 8 months. Elderly people she's humiliated for content. Some of them have been too ashamed to speak out, but others, he shook his head. One man ended up in the hospital after she accidentally caused him to fall downstairs at a mall. A woman lost her job because Aria filmed her having what looked like a confused episode at work, not mentioning that she'd been deliberately given wrong directions. The scope of it was overwhelming. This wasn't just about me or even about the money. Aria was systematically targeting vulnerable people and destroying their lives for social media content. There's more, Tyler said quietly. The investigator found evidence that she's been drugging you. What? The word came out as a croak. Small doses of sedatives in your evening tea. Just enough to make you slightly confused, a little unsteady. Nothing that would show up on a routine medical exam, but enough to support her claims that you were developing cognitive issues. I thought about all the times over the past few months when I'd felt foggy in the evenings, blamed it on getting older, on stress. The nights when I'd felt dizzy or disoriented. The mornings when I'd woken up feeling like I hadn't slept well despite being in bed for 10 hours. She's been poisoning me, I said, the reality of it hitting me like a physical blow, slowly and carefully. Building a case that you were becoming mentally incompetent while simultaneously creating incidents that would support that narrative. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything settling between us. Finally, I looked up at my son. What happens now? Tyler's expression hardened again, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of his father when he was truly angry. Now? Now she comes home to find that her victim isn't as helpless as she thought. As if summoned by his words, we heard a car pulling into the driveway. Tyler stood up, straightening his tie and smoothing down his hair. In seconds, he'd transformed from the frantic man who'd broken down our door to someone cold and controlled. She's about to learn, he said quietly, that there are consequences for hurting my family. The front door opened, and we heard Aria's voice calling out cheerfully, "Tyler, sweetie, you're home early. I have so much to tell you about your mom's little accident." Tyler looked at me one last time. "Whatever happens next, Mom, I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't here to protect you. I'm sorry I married someone who could do this to you. And I'm sorry for what you're about to witness." The sound of heels clicking on hardwood grew closer. "But I'm not sorry for what I'm about to do to her." Aria walked into the kitchen with her usual confidence, phone already in hand, probably ready to document whatever interaction she was planning to have with Tyler about my condition. Her smile was bright and practiced, the same one she used for her followers. "Tyler!" she squealed, rushing toward him with arms outstretched. "I'm so glad you're home early. I was just about to call you about—" She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Tyler's face. His expression was stone cold, completely different from the warm, loving husband she was used to manipulating. Her arms dropped to her sides, and I watched confusion flicker across her features. "About what, Aria?" Tyler's voice was quiet, controlled, but there was something underneath it that made my skin crawl. I'd never heard my son sound so dangerous. "About your mother," Aria said, her voice becoming uncertain. "She had another episode yesterday. The kitchen incident I told you about? It's getting worse, Tyler. I think we need to seriously consider our options for her care." Tyler didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and set it on the kitchen table, screen facing up. With a few taps, the video from Tuesday afternoon began playing, but this wasn't Aria's edited version. This was the raw footage from Tyler's hidden camera, showing everything. The color drained from Aria's face as she watched herself deliberately positioned to bump into me. Watched herself time the collision perfectly. Watched herself immediately pivot to entertainment mode while I stood there burned and humiliated. "I can explain," she whispered. "Can you?" Tyler stood up slowly, his height suddenly seeming imposing in our small kitchen. "Can you explain why you've been systematically abusing my mother for months? Can you explain the sedatives we found in her tea? Can you explain the forged medical documents?" With each question, Tyler pulled a document from his briefcase and placed it on the table. The medication bottles, the fake consultation reports, the guardianship papers. "Can you explain this?" He slammed down a thick folder that I hadn't seen before. Arya stared at it like it was a snake about to strike. "What is that?" she asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. "Bank records," Tyler said, "showing that you've been stealing from my mother for 3 months. Small amounts at first, then increasingly larger sums. $16,000 total, charged to her credit card for things like designer clothes, spa treatments, and equipment for your social media content." $16,000. I felt the room spin slightly. I had noticed some charges on my statements that seemed odd, but when I'd asked Arya about them, she'd had reasonable explanations. Medical appointments I'd supposedly forgotten about, groceries she'd picked up for the household, equipment for home improvements. Those were legitimate expenses, Arya said, but her voice lacked conviction. I was helping Teresa with things she couldn't manage anymore, like the $700 handbag you bought at Nordstrom last week. Tyler's voice was getting colder. Or the $1,500 cosmetic procedure you charged to her card. Or how about the ring light and professional microphone setup you bought for your content creation? Each revelation hit me like a physical blow. She hadn't just been abusing me emotionally and physically. She'd been robbing me blind while pretending to care for me. "And then there's this," Tyler continued, pulling out another folder. "Financial projections showing exactly how much money you'd have access to once you had me declared your mother's guardian and gained control of her assets." He opened the folder to reveal spreadsheets in Arya's handwriting, detailed calculations of my bank accounts, the value of the house, and projections of how much money she could access monthly if I were declared incompetent. "You had it all planned out," Tyler said. "Right down to which facility you'd put her in, and how much of her assets you could liquidate without drawing attention." Arya's breathing was becoming shallow, panicked. Her eyes darted between Tyler and me, looking for some escape, some explanation that would make this all go away. "Tyler, you don't understand," she said, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "Your mother is sick. She's getting confused, having accidents. I was just trying to protect her, to protect both of you from making difficult decisions later. By drugging her," Tyler's voice cracked like a whip. "By deliberately causing accidents and filming them for entertainment? By stealing her money and forging medical documents?" He pulled out his phone again and opened a different app. "Would you like to hear what Dr. Martinez had to say when I called him yesterday?" Arya went white. "You remember Dr. Martinez, don't you? The physician you claimed had diagnosed my mother with early-stage dementia? Funny thing about that, Arya. When I called his office, they had no record of my mother ever being a patient. No consultation, no diagnosis, no treatment recommendations. Nothing. The forgery was complete. Arya had created an entire fictional medical history to support her case for having me declared incompetent. But here's the really interesting part," Tyler continued, his voice getting quieter and more dangerous. "Dr. Martinez does remember you. You called his office 6 weeks ago, asking detailed questions about dementia symptoms, about what kind of documentation would be needed to prove cognitive decline, about the legal process for having someone declared mentally incompetent." Arya started backing toward the kitchen doorway, but Tyler stepped sideways, blocking her escape route. "You researched this, Arya. You planned every detail. You turned my mother into a victim for your entertainment. You stole her money, you poisoned her, and you forged medical documents to steal her freedom. All for what? For money that you weren't even entitled to? For social media content?" "It wasn't supposed to go this far," Arya whispered, and for the first time, I heard something that might have been genuine emotion in her voice. "It started small, just little videos, and then people loved them so much, and the money started coming in and I thought." "You thought what?" Tyler demanded. "That elderly people were fair game? That my mother was disposable? I thought she'd be happier in a facility," Arya's voice rose, becoming shrill. She's lonely here, Tyler. She doesn't have friends. She doesn't go anywhere. She just sits around reading and watching TV. At least in assisted living, she'd have activities, people her own age to talk to. The audacity of it took my breath away. She was trying to justify abuse and theft by claiming it was for my own good. And the money? Tyler asked. I suppose stealing $16,000 from her was for her own good too? That money would have just sat in her accounts, Arya snapped, her mask finally slipping completely. She doesn't spend it on anything. She buys the cheapest groceries, refuses to go on vacations, won't even update her wardrobe. At least I was putting it to good use. Good use. Tyler repeated the words like they tasted bitter. Content creation equipment, designer clothes, cosmetic procedures. That's your definition of good use for money stolen from my mother? I was building a business. Arya's voice was becoming desperate now. A business that could support all of us. Do you know how much money I could make if I had a bigger platform? If I had better equipment? I was investing in our future. Our future? Tyler laughed, but there was no humor in it. Arya, we don't have a future. We never did, apparently, because the woman I thought I married doesn't exist. He reached into his briefcase one more time and pulled out a manila envelope. These are divorce papers. You can sign them now or you can fight them in court while facing criminal charges for elder abuse, theft, fraud, and assault. Arya stared at the envelope like it was a death sentence. Tyler, please, we can work this out. I can get help. I can change. We can go to counseling. Counseling? Tyler's voice rose for the first time. Arya, you've been systematically abusing my mother for months. You drugged her. You burned her with hot soup for internet content. You stole her money and tried to have her declared mentally incompetent so you could steal more. This isn't a marriage problem. This is a criminal problem. The kitchen fell silent except for Arya's rapid breathing. I watched my daughter-in-law realize that her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, that all her manipulation and planning had led to this moment where she had no power left. What about my things? She asked finally, her voice small. What about them? My clothes, my makeup, my equipment. I need my things. Tyler stared at her for a long moment. The things you bought with money stolen from my mother? I don't think so. Tyler, please. You have 20 minutes to pack whatever you brought into this house that actually belongs to you. Everything else stays here until we can sort out what was purchased with stolen money. Arya looked between Tyler and me, searching for any sign of sympathy, any crack in our resolve. She found none. This isn't over, she said finally. Tyler smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen on my son's face. Yes, Arya, it is. As she turned to leave the kitchen, Tyler called after her. Oh, and Arya? I should mention that I've already contacted each of the 12 people you've targeted over the past 8 months. Some of them are very interested in pressing charges. Arya's footsteps faltered on the stairs, but she didn't respond. 20 minutes later, we heard the front door slam. Through the kitchen window, I watched her throw a single suitcase into her car and drive away, leaving behind the life she'd tried to steal from me. Tyler sank into his chair, suddenly looking exhausted again. It's over, Mom. She can't hurt you anymore. But as I sat there surrounded by evidence of months of systematic abuse, I realized that while Arya might be gone, the real work of healing was just beginning. The silence after Arya left was deafening. Tyler and I sat in the kitchen for what felt like hours, surrounded by the evidence of her crimes, neither of us quite able to process what had just happened. The woman who had been living in our home, sharing our meals, pretending to be family, had been systematically destroying my life for months. I should have seen it sooner, Tyler said finally, his voice heavy with guilt. I should have known something was wrong. How could you have known? I asked, though my own voice sounded strange to my ears. She was very good at what she did. That was the truth that hurt the most. Arya hadn't been sloppy or obvious. She'd been calculating, patient, methodical. Every move had been planned, every incident carefully orchestrated to build her case while maintaining plausible deniability. Over the next few days, Tyler helped me sort through everything. We changed all the locks, canceled my credit cards, and set up new bank accounts that Arya couldn't access. I threw away every tea bag in the house, every beverage container that she might have tampered with. Tyler even had the house professionally swept for hidden cameras that Arya might have installed. The hardest part was going through her social media content. Tyler's private investigator had downloaded everything before she could delete it, and we spent hours watching video after video of elderly people being humiliated for entertainment. The comments were the worst part. Thousands of people laughing at vulnerable adults, making cruel jokes about aging, suggesting that these people were burdens who should be put away. "How did I not know she was capable of this?" Tyler asked one evening, as we reviewed the evidence his lawyer would need for the criminal case. I thought about that question for a long time. Looking back, there had been signs. Small moments when her mask had slipped, brief flashes of coldness or calculation. But she'd been so good at covering them up, at presenting herself as the perfect daughter-in-law who was just trying to help. "She told us what we wanted to hear," I said finally. "You wanted to believe you'd married someone kind and caring. I wanted to believe that Tyler had found happiness after his father died. We both saw what we needed to see." The legal proceedings began 2 weeks after Arya's expulsion. Tyler's lawyer filed criminal charges for elder abuse, theft, fraud, and assault. The district attorney's office was very interested in the case, especially when they learned about the other victims. That's when we met Margaret Patterson, a 73-year-old woman who had been featured in one of Arya's most popular videos. Margaret had been shopping at a grocery store when Arya, accidentally, gave her wrong directions to the bathroom, causing her to wander confused through the store for 20 minutes, while Arya filmed and provided commentary about senior moments. The video had gone viral, earning Arya thousands of new followers and several sponsorship deals. But for Margaret, it had been devastating. Her employer, a part-time retail job she'd taken to supplement her Social Security, had seen the video and decided she was too confused to continue working. She'd lost her income and, with it, her ability to afford her medications. "I didn't even know I was being filmed," Margaret told us during a meeting at the lawyer's office. "This young woman approached me asking for directions, and when I tried to help her find what she was looking for, she kept giving me wrong information. I thought I was losing my mind." Tyler clenched his fists as Margaret spoke. I could see him struggling with the knowledge that his wife had destroyed this woman's life for content. "The worst part," Margaret continued, "was watching the video later and seeing all those comments. People saying I should be in a nursing home, that I was too stupid to be allowed out in public. My own grandchildren saw it. They started asking their parents if I was getting dementia. There were others. Robert Chen, an 80-year-old retired teacher who'd been featured falling down mall stairs after Arya deliberately pointed him toward a wet floor. Linda Rodriguez, a 68-year-old grandmother who'd been filmed having what appeared to be a confused episode at a bus stop, not knowing that Arya had given her the wrong schedule information. Each story was heartbreaking. Each represented a life disrupted, a person humiliated, a family affected by Arya's cruelty. And each had generated thousands of views, hundreds of comments, and advertising revenue that had funded Arya's lifestyle. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after her arrest. Arya had hired an expensive attorney, probably with money she'd stolen from me, and was fighting the charges. Her lawyer's strategy seemed to be claiming that everything had been accidents, misunderstandings, coincidences. That strategy fell apart when Tyler's investigator testified about the planning documents found on Arya's computer, detailed notes about potential targets, research into dementia symptoms, calculations about inheritance laws. The prosecution painted a picture of a predator who had systematically targeted vulnerable elderly people for profit. But it was the video evidence that sealed her fate. Tyler's hidden camera footage showing Arya deliberately causing the soup incident was played in court, contrasted with her edited version that made it look like an accident. The jury watched in silence as the truth was revealed, seeing the calculation in her movements, the immediate pivot to entertainment mode while I stood there burned and humiliated. The defendant, the prosecutor said during closing arguments, turned elder abuse into a business model. She systematically targeted vulnerable seniors, caused them deliberate harm, and then profited from their humiliation. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't misunderstood. This was predatory behavior at its worst. The trial lasted 3 days. Aria's family, who had attended the first day in support, quietly disappeared as the evidence mounted. Her social media followers, who had numbered in the hundreds of thousands, dwindled as news of the trial spread. Sponsors pulled their contracts, advertisers canceled partnerships, and the platform that had made her famous suspended her account. When the verdict came in, I was sitting in the courtroom next to Tyler, holding his hand. Guilty on all counts: elder abuse, theft, fraud, assault, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison, with additional time for the financial crimes. But the criminal case was only part of the story. The civil lawsuits began almost immediately. Margaret Patterson sued for lost wages and emotional distress. Robert Chen sued for medical expenses from his fall. Linda Rodriguez sued for defamation. I sued for the money she'd stolen, plus damages for the abuse and attempted fraud. Aria's assets were frozen, her expensive belongings seized to pay restitution. The designer clothes she'd bought with my money, the professional equipment she'd purchased for content creation, even the car she'd driven away from our house. Everything was sold to compensate her victims. The house felt different after she was gone, lighter somehow, as if her presence had been casting a shadow I hadn't even realized was there. Tyler moved back into his childhood bedroom, and we began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. I keep thinking about what would have happened if that anonymous tip hadn't come in, Tyler said one evening as we shared dinner at the kitchen table. If I hadn't found out when I did, I thought about that too. How close she'd come to succeeding. The guardianship papers had been nearly complete. The medical documentation looked convincing. If Tyler hadn't started investigating when he did, I might have found myself declared incompetent, institutionalized, with Aria controlling my assets and my life. But you did find out, I said, and you protected me. Tyler shook his head. I should have been protecting you all along. I should have seen what she was doing. We both wanted to believe the best of her, I said. That doesn't make us weak or stupid. It makes us human. The investigator never did find out who sent Tyler that anonymous tip, the video link that started his investigation. Someone out there had seen what Aria was doing and decided to act. Maybe another victim, maybe just a stranger who recognized abuse when they saw it. I like to think it was Margaret Patterson or one of the others, fighting back in the only way they could. 3 months after the trial, I received a letter from Aria in prison. Tyler wanted to throw it away without reading it, but I was curious. What could she possibly have to say? The letter was 2 pages of self-pity and blame-shifting. She claimed she'd been trying to help me, that she'd only wanted what was best for our family, that everyone had misunderstood her intentions. She asked for forgiveness, said she was getting counseling, promised she was a changed person. At the end, she made one final request. Could I possibly put some money in her commissary account? Prison was so difficult, and she needed basic necessities. I showed the letter to Tyler and we both laughed. Even from prison, even after everything, she was still trying to manipulate me into giving her money. I wrote back a single sentence. The answer is no. It felt good to have the last word for once. To be the one in control of the conversation, the one setting boundaries, the one saying no. Aria had tried to steal my independence, my dignity, my freedom, and my family's financial security. She had turned my pain into entertainment, and my age into a weakness to be exploited. But she had failed. And now she was the one who had lost everything, while I was finally free to reclaim my life. 1 year after Aria's sentencing, I stood in my newly renovated kitchen, preparing Sunday dinner for Tyler and his girlfriend Emma. The burns on my arms had healed completely, leaving only faint scars that reminded me of how far I'd come. The kitchen itself had been transformed too. New countertops, fresh paint, modern appliances. We'd erased every trace of Aria's presence and created something entirely new. Emma was nothing like Aria. She was 34, a pediatric nurse with kind eyes and a genuine laugh. She'd known about everything from the beginning. Tyler had learned his lesson about transparency in relationships. When I first met her, I'd been nervous, guarded, afraid to trust another woman in my son's life. But Emma had been patient, respectful, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. "Mrs. Blackwood," she'd said during our first dinner together, "I want you to know that Tyler has told me everything about what happened. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been for you. If there's anything I can do to help you feel more comfortable, please just let me know." No performative sweetness, no over-the-top attempts to win me over. Just honest acknowledgement of what I'd been through and a genuine offer of support. It had taken months for me to fully trust her, but Emma had never complained about my wariness or tried to rush the process. Now, as I watched her help Tyler set the table, laughing at something he'd said, I felt nothing but gratitude. This was what a healthy relationship looked like. This was what my son deserved. The legal aftermath of Aria's case had continued long after her sentencing. The civil lawsuits had taken months to resolve, but eventually all of her victims had received compensation. Margaret Patterson had been able to afford her medications again and found a new job with an employer who valued her experience. Robert Chen had recovered from his injuries and was considering writing a book about elder abuse awareness. Linda Rodriguez had started a support group for seniors who'd been targeted by online predators. As for me, I'd received full restitution for the money Aria had stolen, plus additional damages for pain and suffering. The money sat in my account, mostly untouched. After everything that had happened, material possessions seemed less important than they once had. What mattered was freedom. The freedom to wake up each morning without fear, without wondering what new humiliation awaited me. The freedom to trust my own perceptions, to know that if something seemed wrong, it probably was. The freedom to set boundaries and enforce them without guilt. I'd started volunteering at a local senior center, helping other elderly people recognize the signs of financial abuse and online exploitation. It turned out that Aria wasn't unique. There were dozens of social media creators who targeted vulnerable populations for content. My story had become a cautionary tale, shared in workshops and training sessions for caregivers and family members. "The thing people don't understand," I told audiences when I spoke about my experience, "is how gradual it was. She didn't start by burning me with soup or forging medical documents. She started with small boundary violations, little moments of disrespect that seemed harmless. By the time the abuse escalated, I'd already been conditioned to accept unacceptable behavior. The responses to my talks were always intense. Other seniors would approach me afterward, sharing their own stories of manipulation and abuse. Adult children would thank me for helping them recognize warning signs in their own parents' situations. Caregivers would ask for advice about protecting their elderly clients. It felt good to turn my trauma into something helpful, to ensure that Aria's victims wouldn't be forgotten and that other potential victims might be protected. Tyler had thrown himself into his work with renewed focus, but he'd also made significant changes in his priorities. He traveled less, delegated more, and made sure we had regular family time. We'd started a tradition of Sunday dinners, just the three of us now that Emma had become a permanent fixture in our lives. "I keep thinking about how different things could have been," Tyler said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "If I hadn't gotten that anonymous tip, if I hadn't started investigating when I did." "But you did?" I reminded him, the same response I always gave when he went down this path. "And you saved me." "We saved each other," he corrected. "You were already figuring it out. You found those documents, you saw through her lies. I just provided the backup you needed." He was right, and that realization had been one of the most important parts of my healing. I hadn't been a helpless victim. Even while being drugged, manipulated, and abused, some part of me had remained alert, suspicious, ready to fight back when the moment came. That strength had never left me, even when I'd thought it had. Emma looked up from where she was loading the dishwasher. "Have you heard anything about Aria recently?" Tyler and I exchanged glances. We had, actually. The prison system sent us periodic updates as victims of her crimes, and the news wasn't encouraging. "She's been disciplined several times for attempting to manipulate other inmates," I said. "And she's refused most of the counseling programs they've offered. Her parole hearings keep getting postponed because she won't acknowledge the harm she caused." "Some people never change," Emma said quietly. "And some people do," Tyler added. looking at me with pride. Mom's stronger now than she was before this whole thing started. He was right about that too. I was stronger. Not because of what Arya had done to me, but because of how I'd survived it, how I'd found my way back to myself, how I'd learned to trust my instincts and value my own worth. The scars on my arms had faded, but I still looked at them sometimes, remembering that day in the kitchen when Arya had burned me for content. The memory no longer filled me with shame or pain. Instead, it reminded me of my resilience, of the moment when I'd begun to see through her manipulation. 6 months ago, I'd made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I'd started dating again. Harold was a widower I'd met at the senior center, a retired teacher who volunteered in the literacy program. He was 71 with gray hair and laugh lines around his eyes, and he treated me with the kind of respect I'd forgotten I deserved. Our relationship was slow, careful, built on genuine friendship and shared interests rather than convenience or manipulation. Tyler had been nervous about it at first, understandably protective after everything that had happened with Arya, but Harold had won him over quickly with his straightforward honesty and obvious care for my well-being. The thing about Harold, I'd told Tyler when he'd expressed his concerns, is that he makes me feel like myself, not like someone I have to perform for, not like someone who needs to prove her worth, just like Teresa. That was what I'd learned through all of this. I was enough, exactly as I was. My age wasn't a weakness to be exploited or a problem to be solved. My kindness wasn't naivety, and my trust wasn't stupidity. I was a whole person with value and strength and wisdom earned through 7 decades of living. Arya had tried to convince me otherwise, had tried to make me believe I was confused, incompetent, burdensome. She'd tried to steal not just my money but my sense of self-worth, my independence, my dignity. She'd failed. On this Sunday evening, as I watched Tyler and Emma planning their upcoming vacation, as I thought about my dinner date with Harold tomorrow night, as I looked around the kitchen that was once again truly mine, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace. I was 71 years old now, and I was exactly where I belonged, in my own home, surrounded by people who loved me for who I was, free to make my own choices and live my own life. Arya was in prison, serving her sentence for the crimes she'd committed against me and others. Her social media empire had crumbled. Her reputation was destroyed and her victims had found justice. Sometimes healing doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes it means remembering everything clearly, understanding exactly what happened, and choosing to move forward anyway. It means reclaiming your power not by seeking revenge, but by refusing to let the trauma define you. I thought about the anonymous person who had sent Tyler that first video, the stranger who had seen abuse and decided to act. I never did find out who it was, but I'd written them a letter anyway, thanking them for their courage. I'd given it to Tyler to post on an online forum where advocates shared information about elder abuse cases, hoping it might reach the right person. "You probably saved my life," I'd written. "More than that, you saved my dignity, my independence, and my faith in human kindness. Thank you for seeing what others missed and for having the courage to speak up." I hoped they knew that their action had mattered, that their willingness to get involved had changed everything for me and for all of Arya's other victims. As I turned off the kitchen lights and headed upstairs to my bedroom, I felt grateful for the hard-learned wisdom that had come from surviving Arya's abuse. I knew now that predators rely on silence, isolation, and shame to maintain control over their victims. They count on good people to look the away, to mind their own business, to avoid getting involved. But there are also people like that anonymous tipster, like Tyler's investigator, like the prosecutor who took my case seriously, like the other victims who found the courage to testify. People who understand that protecting the vulnerable isn't someone else's responsibility, it's everyone's. I was safe now, surrounded by love and respect, free to live the life I'd always deserved, and Arya, she was exactly where she belonged, facing the consequences of her choices, learning that actions have accountability. That was justice enough for me. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.